Right, so I've been reflecting on this idea of what decision-making is and what a decision is. And I've come up with the proposal, or hypothesis at least, that although we think of decision-making as a rather grave, serious practice, that at its heart is madness. Now, this isn't completely my idea. I am ripping off a French philosopher who I'm totally infatuated with, not in the biblical sense, but with a French philosopher, actually Algerian philosopher called Jacques Derrida, who wrote about the madness of decision. And that's where I want to sort of get to in this little disquisition on the subject. But I'm going to go through a couple of highways and byways in order to get there, to try and sort of make this point that decision-making is a form of madness. So just to sort of take a step back for a second, what is a decision? Often, in fact, a decision is the same as a choice. Like you have a choice between two things. Do you prefer Meghan or Kate, for example? Based on nothing in particular, we have a choice and then we make a decision. And in fact, most decisions come down to numbers. Like that's a binary choice, a choice between two things. Incidentally, there is a choice over one thing, and there's an English phrase which I think is probably falling into desuetude a bit now, falling out of use now, which is called Hobson's choice, which is basically take it or leave it. It goes back to a man, I think an 18th century dude, who had a livery stable yard, and he'd rent out horses for people to ride. So he was a bit like a kind of Uber controller of his day. People would pitch up and say, I'd like to hire a horse, please. Anyway, he got fed up with people always choosing the same horse, so he began to rotate them. And so when people pitched up, they'd say, I want, actually, Thomas, I want that one in the back. He'd say, no, this is the one, because I've rotated them, take it or leave it. So Hobson's choice is choice of one, take it or leave it. Kate versus Meghan, choice of two, binary choice. Actually, human beings, for reasons for which no doubt there is good research in cognitive neuroscience, actually prefer choices of three. So if I give you a choice, who do you prefer, Kate, Meghan, or the Queen? We find that a better choice than, just Kate or Meghan. We like a little bit more elbow room when we're making choices, basically. But actually, the example I've just given you there is a bit of a faux ami, bit of a false friend, because although, human beings do like a choice among three things, they like the three things to cohere and be a set, as it were. And if you think about it, and you may have sort of heard this, in the way I was saying it, Kate, Meghan, and the Queen they are a set, but they're not a set. Okay, they're all royal and posh and famous, well off. But actually, they're different generations. And also, Kate and Meghan both married into the royal family rather than being part of the kind of royal lineage. So it does something a little bit odd, for our processing skills, our processing mechanisms. We think, okay, I like choosing between three, but actually, is this a coherent choice among three things? Because it's more like a 2 + 1. So it would be better actually to choose between, three citrus fruits or something like that, because they form all the same set. So 3 is a good number for us. We like 3. And we hate, actually, things get worse the more we have. So if you think about going to a Chinese restaurant, typically, Chinese menu, you might have a choice not of 3, but of like 87 things, right? And it's, especially if it's the first time you've been to the restaurant, it's quite confusing, right? And what we end up doing is deselecting, because it's just too much to process, right? So essentially you boil things down. And actually, the majority of people choose exactly the same meal every time they go to a Chinese restaurant. Once they've chosen for the first time, they'll go back and have exactly the same thing with very small variations. Because we don't like too much choice, so we narrow it down. So in other words, our happiness when it comes to choices doesn't increase in a linear way. It's like a bell curve. There's a point at which we've had just the right number of choices, and that's fine. We peak with that. Beyond that, the number of choices is overwhelming. It becomes incoherent. The external incoherence is matched by our internal incoherence. It's overwhelming. I'll just have the chow mein again. Thank you. Right? So that's what we end up doing. Anyway, so most choices take the form of kind of numbers, like how many. But some choices are a bit more existential than that, and this is where we come to this much trumpeted notion of the madness of decision. And I mentioned Jacques Derrida, who's this Algerian French philosopher, but he in turn was referring to a 19th century Danish philosopher. Obviously my Danish pronunciation is impeccable. His name is Søren Kierkegaard. And Kierkegaard talks about this notion of the leap of faith, which has become a pretty much a kind of everyday phrase, at least in English. What is a leap of faith? Why does he talk about leap of faith? What's that to do with? Well, Kierkegaard's talking about faith as in religious faith. And basically what he's saying is, no matter how many arguments you have for believing in God, no matter how clever the deductions that you might be presented with, no matter how finely wrought the series of steps that a wise philosopher might take you through in order to convince you of the existence of God, at a certain point, all of that rationalization or ratiocination, as it's called in philosophy, gives over, because then you have to choose. It's like, you know, A, B, C, I follow the logic, but now I actually have to believe. So Kierkegaard says, when you're making a decision, there's always a point at which the reasoning that leads up to it has to stop, and then you leap. So that is why faith is a leap, because you're no longer operating in the mode of reason. It's a jump. It's a Latin phrase, a saltus, like in French, sauter. You know, you jump into faith, like taking the plunge, essentially, like over the cliff edge, right? And what Derrida says is, well, actually all decisions are like that. And he refers back to the etymology of the word decision, which is Latin. It's related, it comes from exactly the same family of words as precision and excision. It's to do with cutting. So a decision is the point at which you cut. And what Derrida says is, that's what happens with a decision. There's a point at which you cut the reasoning and then do the doing. And there's actually a disjunction between the thinking before and the doing afterwards. And that's why reason is held in suspense, and to up the ante, Derrida calls it the madness of decision. And that is why, my friend, all decision-making is fundamentally mad.